Hi, everyone. It's Catherine Ellis here with the Institute for Sex, Intimacy, and Occupational Therapy. And I am here with the Teach Me Sex series, which is an educational series to learn about all the different ways that humans have sex, express their sexuality, and the joys and complications of connecting with others. We ask the same 5 questions every time. And while we are highlighting diverse ways of engagement, and different experiences, I also want to encourage you to consider ways you can relate and how some of what you might hear helps you understand yourself just a little bit better. So, Teach Me Sex is explicit, it's honest, and it's intimate. And we want to disclose that not everyone publicly shares about themselves as sexual beings. Actually, most people don't, and that's okay. That doesn't mean they aren't sexual or aren't empowered by their sexuality. So, said frankly, let's not sexualize people who do share or asexualize people who don't, or generalize what we hear today to other people who share identities with our guests. We're delighted by our guests who choose to use self-disclosure as a form of education. And they do so because education is a part of their personal and professional missions. Teach Me Sex is all about the more you know, the more you know. So today we have Sormeh Lavi, and we are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us and thank you for teaching us. So to start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us what we need to know about you.
Sure. So I am a recent OTD graduate. So I'm also an occupational therapist. And I specialize in pediatrics, but I'll be working mostly in acute care with adults. And I'm excited to be here. I definitely identify as a sexual being. I'm a queer first generation woman of color. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a hard femme. And I've been active in the queer community for just over a decade. So I didn't really ever identify as straight. And yeah, talking about sex is one of my favorite pastimes. I like to desensitize what people think they know and sort of make people a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Talking about sex is one of my favorite pastimes as well.
Perfect.
So, we're kindred spirits here. All right. So thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself. So now tell us about some of the ways that you have sex.
Sure. Yeah. So I primarily have sex with other queer people. For me, it's less about identify as queer and not pansexual because I don't engage with cisgender men, which are men who are comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth. And for me, it's less about the actual hardware or genitalia and more about someone's queerness. So that can look a lot of different ways, and I'm not going to define somebody else's queerness, but for me, queerness is on a spectrum. It's all different bodies, different sorts of people, and that includes whatever they do or don't have in their pants. I would say that I'm a pretty equal playing field when it comes to people that I engage with sexually. I'm currently married to a transgender man, but we are not fully monogamous. So we like to identify as monogamish, which can mean that we engage with other people together or separately, but we are mostly each other's primary sexual partners. So I would say engaging in sex for me looks a lot of different ways depending on who I'm with. But I would also say that engaging sexually for me very seldomly includes penetration, which I think for a lot of folks is like automatic. It's not sex if there's no penetration. I have sex all the time without penetration, just because we don't have time to do it or we're not in the mood for it. And it also depends on like who's being penetrated. So I would say that sex is creative for me and in our household, and it can include oral, it can include anal, it can include just hands, we can have our clothes on. So it's quite the range, and it's hard to define. I used to think that queer sex included an orgasm in there somewhere for somebody, but I feel like even that can be a bit of a pigeonhole. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Range.
Thank you. How about what about the last time that you had sex? What did it look?
Yeah, so last time I had sex was on my mini moon, so it was extra romantic, I like to think. And it was, let me figure out what we did. I think it was oral, both ways. So I think I went first and then he went. Yeah, so to us, that's like perfectly good, or probably
Yeah.
preferred
Yeah.
form of sex. So,
And what made it more romantic?
well, I mean, we could like hear the ocean and see it from the
Uh,
we had just gotten out of the hot tub, and it was kind of, I mean, the high of getting married and then getting to just hang out together after all of that really made it feel sexy. I know it had been a while. I'd actually been teasing him the week up to our wedding. Every time he tried to have sex with me, I said we had to wait till marriage. So I think there was like a little bit of, I mean, we definitely had sex before we got married, but there was, I think, a little bit of increased sexual tension there. So that made it extra fun.
yeah, that sounds, I love that, hearing like the ocean and it sounds like,
Feels.
yes. Okay. Um, how are ways that you express yourself sexually? Like what, and why does that feel good for you? So how do you express yourself as a sexual person?
Yeah. So I would say that I express myself as a sexual being mostly in how I use kink. So we're also pretty active in the kink community. So that means going to kink parties where it's like a very consensual setting and everyone knows their limits and boundaries and is able to talk about them. And so sometimes I do like kink performances, like for different venues, sort of through Folsom Street Fair, other queer events. And sometimes they're rehearsed and other times they're not. And I would say that that's probably the most loud, sort of expressive way that I express my sexual identity. So that can include, it's mostly impact play. So flogging, spanking, paddles, things like that. A little bit of rope sometimes, bondage. So those are the ways, especially with an audience, that I feel really empowered and in my body, and it also gives me opportunity to really connect with whoever is on the other side. So whoever's bottoming for me, it ends up being like a really sweet and intimate experience for the people engaging in it. But I think that for the audience, it seems kind of like, rough and tumble. But when you're in that sort of relationship, it's just very connected and intimate and so I'd say that's the way that I express my sexuality most outwardly. Yeah.
So it sounds like for the audience, it looks like very intense, but for the people that are doing it, it has to be like, you have to be really into a flow with each other.
And you have
like
to be
really
intuitive
connected.
and checking in a lot. Yeah. It's not like I'm unwillingly beating someone without saying like, hey, where are you at? 1 to 10, how far are we going? There's safe words. So what makes it fun for the audience is that those nuances are usually pretty quiet and they just see this like what looks like just this like big painful experience, whereas for us it's just very, it's like warm and fuzzy. I don't know how.
Yeah. All right. Well, how about tell us about a time where you felt really validated with a dating or a sexual experience?
Probably meeting who is now my husband just felt very validating for both of us. I had not been with a transgender man who is passing ever. And so a lot of my identity before I met him was held up in like, I have to look queer. You have to look at me and you have to look at your partner and you have to be like, that's a gay person or that's a queer person or that's a lesbian. Like that felt really important to me. And so, and I'm also the first woman that he's been with. So he had been with cisgender men before me. So I think kind of like this meeting of worlds, learning to understand that my queerness is not dissolved because the person I'm with looks a certain way, and him sort of understanding his queerness as more expansive than like I'm just a gay man. I think it was very mutually validating and then sort of blossomed into, I mean, obviously it's working out, we got married, but it blossomed into this validation for both of us that like for neither one of us is our queerness any less than, because if you saw us on the street, if we weren't, flagging in some way, I think most people would think like, oh, there's like a standard cis straight couple. And so learning for both of us that validation isn't any less than, I think has felt really special. And yeah, and then with that came kind of like all of these really fun and exciting, expansive sexual experiences. I mean, there are so many ways that we can have sex, and so it keeps things really fresh and then increases that validation.
So just detach, like having this experience that forced you to detach, like how other people see you
Right.
as validating your queerness.
Yeah, and like not caring. I think it's easy to say like, I'm not supposed to care what other people think of you, but then I had been such a loud member of the queer community, and like my friends joke and call me like the mayor. So it's very like, oh, like I don't look as queer anymore. When in reality, like if you know me and you know us, that couldn't be farther from the truth.
Mm-hmm. How about a time where it felt really complicated? Like not, a time in your sort of dating experience or sexual experience where it just felt hard.
Yeah. So when I was sort of elbows deep in the polyamory community, and just really exploring my sexuality, like going to a ton of orgies and play parties and sex parties, and had like a lot of partners, and sort of had this like web of like who's sleeping with who and are we sleeping together. It was really fun, super, super fun and exhilarating, but also like difficult emotionally. It was hard to, have feelings for someone who maybe didn't feel the same way, or sharing partners was difficult. As much as I love and respect the polyamory community, and I was in it for just under a decade, it was hard, especially this last sort of hurrah before I met my husband. It was difficult. It was hard navigating my own feelings and other people's feelings. It's like a lot. I mean, anyone who's been polyamorous knows it's just like endless conversations and check-ins, and how did that feel? And were you okay with this? And oh, you have a date with that person? I just had a date with that person. So that was a time that I would say was equally exhilarating, because I was having so many really interesting sexual experiences, but also was just like exhausted. And I was in grad school, so it was like maybe not the best choice of activities, but yeah, that was hard.
Okay. All right. So how about our last question? So teach me how to sex. What is the Sormeh special? So like one tip, one move, and you don't have to limit it to one. Like if you've got
So
if you've got a lot up your sleeve, like let's hear
okay.
them, okay? But like one tip, move, action that like enhances the pleasure and the sexy time experience.
Yeah, I got you. So
Okay.
I
Take notes.
yes, I would say, okay, number one is don't be afraid of lube. I feel like for most of my cisgender and straight counterparts, the fact that I tell them I use lube is like, what? Why? Like, I mean, you can just like never have too much lube. That for me, especially get something water-based. I really like this liquid brand. That's my like kind of overarching tip, is like no gender or genitalia is too good. So
Sir Matt, I have to tell you that when I talk to my clients, I literally go, I'm like lube, like just
yeah,
just lube, and I say put it everywhere from
just
your.
slip and slide.
I was like put it belly button to butthole and knee to knee, and they
Yeah,
always.
you can't go wrong. I think people are afraid of it, or they think it's like taboo, or it's like only for gay men or something. And it's like for all the things. Like it's
Or
just,
if it's for people with vulvas, it's like, oh, you're not
yeah,
turned on, like.
whatever. Your
Yeah.
changes as you age. I do not
Right.
create as much lubricant as I used to. So
Yeah.
good. All genders, all genitals, all the lube. And then I would also say, like for me, giving oral, like performing head, whatever you want to call it, is probably my like favorite thing to do. And all of my partners seem to like it. And I would say that like the best piece of advice there is to just like don't be a picky eater. Like,
Okay.
yeah, like don't kind of like skirt around or like be afraid to get in there, like smash your face in it. Again, the type of genitals, I don't care what they are.
Yeah.
To me. Like get in there, don't be afraid, get sloppy, because that's when it's good.
Yeah.
And for me, it really shows the person that I'm like, I am into you.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, myself included, for a while, receiving oral was kind of like, ugh, like, does it smell okay? Did I shave enough? Did I shave too much? And when the person giving is just full force, 110,
Having at it, feasting.
yeah, then the person receiving can just sort of relax.
Relax.
Like, okay, they're down there because they want to be. So
Yeah. I know you have more, but I'm gonna really like dive in.
no, that's fine.
I'm gonna go all in on this one, right?
Let's do it.
So I oftentimes will tell people, like, I think with oral, a lot of times we're like really concerned about like, is the technique that I'm using um like working for them? And I
Yeah.
think that we can get really like wrapped up in it. And I
Yeah.
think one is that like if you know everyone likes a different technique, so like we're
Mm-hmm.
never going to know unless we try like a variety of different ways to like be licking
Just
and
ask.
kissing and just ask, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times I like the idea of like just like looking at the genitals and thinking like what would feel good for me to be like doing
Mm-hmm.
to this, how um how would I want to put this part in my mouth and
Right.
be licking it or kissing it? And do I want to start off slow and like kind of tease myself? And and we want to be givers, but I think sometimes helping people kind of like get off this like performance
Mm-hmm.
wavelength can be really helpful, and they can kind of be looking at it like in a mindful way, like how do I want to experience like this genitals on my mouth in this moment?
Yeah. I think it's a good point. I think that also, like, I think folks are afraid to talk
Yeah.
during sex because they think it like takes the sexy out. But I think it's just like, I'm not afraid to say like more pressure or
Yeah.
like bigger circles or make your tongue flatter. Like, I know what I want to feel. And I think
Yeah.
it'd be very empowering and like helpful. You want the person
Yeah.
on you to feel like they're doing a good job. And just tell them
Right.
like smaller circles or more pointy. Like there's your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, like, a recent experience I had was someone, I was giving a lot of those directions, and the person, one, thought it was so cool to like get a direction and then they do it and then they see my response.
Yeah, it
And
works.
that was like, you know,
Talk about validating.
fireworks. And they really like commented on how much fun that was for them. And I think we are afraid to talk, but a lot of our partners are like, tell me what to do.
Hey, just tell me how you like it and then I'll do
Yeah.
it. And then
Yeah.
next time I'll remember that. And then maybe next time you don't want it that way and you get to just like mix it up. But
Right. Yeah, totally. All right. I mean, what else you got up that sleeve?
other good tips. Don't be afraid of toys and like the weird ones. Like we have a bunch of stuff that we don't really use that often, but it's just nice to have, like a pinwheel and like
Mm,
one of those little feathery ones and like, just like have a funny assortment of things. Because I think
mhm.
people also feel, this is actually an assumption, that people feel like stagnant in their sex lives. And I like to imagine that queer people are just like having all the fun. Um, but it does require more of a sense of creativity when you're not cis and straight, and it's not just like this is how sex works. Like it's fun to have sort of an arsenal of things that maybe you don't use all the time, but it's like a quiet Sunday afternoon and you break out the furry cuffs. Like
Yeah.
I think that's also pretty fun. And if you're with someone long term or even by yourself, you can sort of over time stock up on your fun toys, because I think that folks also see them as like intimidating and expensive, which they can be costly over time. So
Mm.
sort of slowly stocking up on fun, silly things, I think is just keeps things interesting.
Yeah. I love the idea of having an arsenal, and like you open it up and it's like a
Yeah,
feather,
it's our
like
closet. You
a
open our living
feather.
room. Yeah, our living room closet has just like all these things hanging.
Yeah.
And it's like we don't always use all of it. It's impossible, but when we do, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. All right. What would you do with a feather?
So we have like the tiny, I should have grabbed it. It's like a stick with like a little feather poof on the end.
Okay.
It's called a tickler. There we go. Not a feathery thing. And for that, we do a lot of like sensory play, very OT, but
Mm,
using a blindfold so that they don't know like where it's gonna strike, and kind of using it as like as it's like aptly titled, a tickler. But if
yeah.
you know where it's gonna be, and then it's like sometimes I like to mix it with the pinwheel, so there's like something that's more of an
Oh,
sensation versus like a really sweet soft one.
yeah.
But I prefer to use toys like that with a blindfold, because if
Yeah.
coming, it's like not nearly as exhilarating. I don't think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like the idea is like, if think about like if you like those sensations, right? Like having a blindfold on and not knowing like where the if like the feather is going to be in your inner thigh or the pinwheel is going to be on your inner thigh.
Right. What's it
And
gonna
like
be?
you're not expecting that, or it's coming like at your neck,
Mhm.
or the inside of your elbow or something. Like that would feel I that's the idea that comes to mind is like teasing kind
Yeah.
of. Yeah, and I think teasing is maybe this is an assumption, right? But I wonder if that's just a very underutilized like part of sex, because we can be so quick, right? If we're quick
Right.
and
To like
it's
get to it.
yeah, then there's not even enough space to tease.
Right.
And so if you delay your gratification a little bit, like if you're thinking about like touching a vulva and touching a clitoris, like touching the outside of the vulva first and then moving
Hmm.
inward, right? It just creates this like, we all know where we're going and you're taking
Right.
your time.
The destination we're all aware
Like
of.
we all know. And yeah, so I think that teasing is like, it doesn't, and it can be as kinky or as not kinky as,
Right.
and then, so, all right, any last tips or
Um,
takeaways for us?
well, I'll tell you my favorite toy currently. So we
Okay.
have a rose quartz dildo. It doesn't really
Mm,
end on it or anything. It's just like a perfect long oval. But that has been like for folks who are into that sort of like witchy
yeah.
vibe, has been a really interesting sort of energetic experience. Like it's very different than using silicone or fingers. So they also
Uh,
yoni eggs. I have an obsidian yoni egg that I just use on myself for like mostly for healing. It's less explicitly sexual, but it's
okay.
related. But I would say that's something sort of interesting and like a different path to take, especially if you're not partnered or you're not wanting to engage with anybody else right now.
Mhm.
That would be a very nice sort of treat yourself.
Yeah.
More like I don't even know if I would call it a toy. Like it feels like a tool.
A tool.
Yeah.
And so when it's inside of you, you feel it differently than like a silicone.
Yeah, and like kind of the process of getting it inside, and like the way that because it's made of crystal, when you first have it, it's very very cold.
Hmm.
It warms up progressively either inside your body or like I warm it up like against my chest or like under my
Yeah.
clothes. So even that process, like we were discussing, like just feels more like an intentional process and less like, all right, get it in there, like let's go, we don't have time, sort of thing. Um,
Interesting.
feels like a more like ritualistic,
Yeah.
um,
Ritual. Yeah.
kind of
Having rit- yeah, having
an
rituals are
interesting way to engage.
cool.
Yeah,
I always think like having rituals around sex are helpful for people to kind of help them transition into like this non-erotic world that we live in into an erotic world. So
mhm.
like lighting a candle or
Right.
turning on music, like this is like it's a way that we have to take this journey to go into an erotic space, and we're signaling
Yeah.
like a ritual. Um, well, awesome. Okay. Sormeh, we are so grateful for you to join us
Yeah.
for our Teach Me Sex. And thank you for sharing about yourself so that
No problem.
we can also learn. But more importantly, so that we can play and have sex and communicate in a way that feels authentic to us. So thank you for showing up here and being authentic
Yeah.
and showing us, because it's really, it helps us all be a little bit more brave and be even whatever it is that we're we want to be authentic to. It helps us do that when people like you show up and just so confidently share about yourself. So thanks so much, and thanks for teaching
Yeah.
us.
My pleasure. Really fun to talk about.